Your logs don't just have to be a wall of text. Here's the easiest way to use Slog or Slog to turn your messy Go logs into searchable, filterable JSON that your observability tools will love. This is going to take your debug time from 5 hours to 5 minutes and save you a headache. Getting started with Slog then is as simple as just going ahead and using it. There's nothing to install. It was added to Go in version 1.21. So if I want an info level log message, I can simply say slog.info and then provide the message that I want. So I'm going to use hello-slog here. As you can see, it's been imported from the log/slog package. So out of the box then, what is the difference between the slog package and the log package? Well, let's take a look at these in the terminal. If I go ahead and run this application now, you can see not that much is actually different between them. The only difference at the moment is that the slog version here has this info log level attached to it. But trust me, it's a lot more powerful than that. So let's go ahead and get some structured JSON logging. To do that, we'll need to set up a custom logger. That's going to be logger here. This is then going to equal slog.new. And then inside of here, you can say slog.new JSON handler. For now, we'll go os.standardout, and then we'll set the handler options to nil, like so. Now, there's two ways we can go ahead and start using this logger. We can either use it directly by just doing things like logger.info, or we can now set this as our default logger. To do that, we're going to say slog.setDefault, and then we pass through logger in here like so. What this means is anywhere we're doing slog.info and various other things, that is now using the logger that I just created. So let's take a look at what our structured logs look like. We run this, you can see we're getting nice JSON log messages out, and we've got that time, level, and message as the keys, and then their values as well. But something cool has happened here too. When we use that set default, it actually went ahead and changed the log package handler to use this JSON handler as well. So you can see this hello log message here was set up using the log package, but it's come out as structured JSON. This means we get a nice and consistent format across our application, and it's also an easy way to migrate as well. With that done though, I am going to remove this log package one here, as I'm going all in with Slog for my log package. Now you've seen the slog.info function, but Slog actually has 4 log levels by default. You can add more if you want to. That is info, warn, debug, and error. Let's say we wanted to add a new debug message. We can say slog.debug, and then I'll simply call this one debug message here. Now if we went ahead and tried to run this, you can actually see that we're not seeing that debug message come out in the terminal here. And that is because by default, Slog is using a log level of info, so it's suppressing anything below that. If we want to go ahead and change this, we need to pass through some handler options. So here, all I need to do is say slog.handler options, and then we can pass through the level that we want. And I'll say slog.level debug like so. Now, if we run this again, we can see that we're getting that debug message coming out into the terminal here. Now that we've got that, let's look at how we can add in our own attributes onto this JSON here. I'm going to go ahead and delete this slog.debug, but let's say we wanted to add in our own attributes onto this info message. The first thing to note is that the first value here is always going to be the message, so it's always going to be what shows up here. But after that, we can add an unlimited amount of attributes, and that can be key value pairs. Now these can be loosely typed, so if I do key1 here, we can then also add in value1 like so. So if I go ahead and run this now, you can see that we're going to see key1 on our JSON and also value1 as well. But watch out though, as you may add a wrong number of key value pairs here. Luckily, 𝗖𝗵𝗽𝗀 should point this out for you though. But let's say we added in key2 here, but then didn't provide a value. You'll see that we go ahead and try and log this out. We'll get this bad key showing up on this object here, and it's essentially telling us that we've got the wrong number of key value pairs here. But as I said, 𝗖𝗵𝗽𝗀 should pick that up for you as well, and you're seeing that as an error message in my IDE there. But let's say we wanted to strictly type these. We can actually use some slog helper methods. Instead of doing loosely typed key value pairs, we can now say slog.string, for example, if we want to make sure it's showing up as a string. So for this, I'll do the same thing. I'll say key1 and then value1, but we're just using this slog.string helper attribute here. If I now print this out, you can see we're essentially getting the exact same thing out. Here we've got that key1 value2, but now if I try to change this to an integer, for example, and save this and run it, we should see that we get an error, and that's telling us that we can't use 2 as it's not a string value. We could instead go ahead and change this to slog.integer, and then when we use that, that should fix that error, and it's showing up as a number instead. This doesn't stop you from being able to add in loosely typed values though, so I could still make the error of putting in key2 here, and then it's showing up as bad key. If you want a stricter method, we actually need to use a different function entirely. So instead of slog.info here, we'll change this to slog.log attributes like so. Then we need to pass through a few different things into this one. The first one is context.background like so. Then once we've done the context.background, we need to pass it the log level we want since we haven't defined that with the function. So we can say slog, and then here I'll just say level info. Then we pass through the message that we want. So I'll say info message here. And then after that, we can go ahead and use our slog attributes. Now, these ones you can't loosely type. You have to go ahead and use the helpers like slog.int, slog.string, and various other things. So again, if I recreate that key1 value one that we've had before, we can go ahead and say this is a string, key1 value one. Make sure I finish this off with the comma there, and we can go ahead and see what this looks like in the terminal. Pretty much the exact same thing. We've got that log level of info, the time, and the message, and then the custom attributes that we asked for. Let's take this structure a step further though and add in some grouped attributes so we can have nested objects on our JSON. So where we've done things like slog.string, to add in a grouped attribute, all we need to do is go ahead and use slog.group. Then we can give this the key name. So let's say I call this one here request. Then we can just add in the attributes we want inside of this group. So if I do slog.string here, I'll change this one here to method. And then we can go ahead and say this was a get request like so. And again, just make sure I finish off that comma there. Now if we go ahead and log this, you see we get a nice nested object with that request, and then it has my method inside of that, thanks to this slog.group attribute that we've used. Now, what if you have these same values that you want to use in your log messages across, say, one function or even your entire application? There's a few options for that, but let's look at how we can set up a child logger. So instead of using the slog.log attributes here, first we're going to want to set up a child logger. So we'll do child. This here is then going to equal logger. And now we can simply do .with. Inside of this .with, we can go ahead and use the attributes that we want to share. So if I actually take out this slog.string, if I go ahead and move this up into the with here, so it's slog.string method of get, because obviously in this function, if we're running a get request, I want this to appear on all of my log messages. I'm then just going to remove this group so we can see it nice and clearly. And the final thing you want to do is make sure you're actually using your child logger. So instead of slog.log attributes here, I'll do child.log attributes like so. If we now go ahead and run that, we should see that my method of get is showing up still on this key value pair here. And you can see we've got the method there and the get value as well. And now if I go ahead and do something like child.info as well and just say second message, we'll see that this will also appear there too, since it's now being shared, since we've used this child logger. And there we go. You can see it's also showing up on this log message here. Another really cool tip that you can do with things like the child loggers is, let's say we wanted to clean up our JSON structure a little bit and have the default values on their own and then everything else nested underneath a group. Instead of doing groups inside of our log attributes, we can actually go ahead and say logger, and then we can say .with group like so, and then we can just give this a name. So I'll just say .info like that. And now if we go ahead and print this out, you can see that everything gets nested underneath this info object like so. So any attributes that we add on later, that will all be nested within that info attribute. And then you can have a nice structure where you just have the defaults, as I said, like time, level, and message, and then an info to carry all of your custom ones. And there you go. That is the simplest way you can go ahead and get structured JSON logging set up in your Go application using Slog. Now you can actually take Slog a whole lot further. It's super customizable. One awesome thing I want to point out is one of Slog's major design goals. That is to provide a unified logging front end for Go applications, while the back end, so that handler that we saw like the JSON, remains completely customizable from program to program. This has two key benefits. First is that the logging API is consistent across all of your dependencies, even if the backends differ, and it also avoids coupling the logging implementation to a specific package by making it super easy to switch out. This just means that if I wanted to go ahead and say use Uber's Zap library, but then I realize I want to use another one like ZeroLog, all I'd have to change about my logging would be the handler itself. If you want to take Slog a whole lot further, we have an awesome blog post covering it. You can learn how to add your own log levels, get stack traces from errors, and log context values as well. If you want to see more Slog videos, let me know in the comments and be sure to subscribe for more development tips. See you in the next one.